The catering bill for the evening was roughly the equivalent of a down payment on a modest house. But as I stood on the flagstone terrace of our Westchester home, watching the fairy lights reflect on the surface of the infinity pool, I had to admit the illusion was flawless. There were 80 guests mingling on the manicured lawn. The air smelled of late September pine, expensive perfume, and the faint, sweet smoke of roasted fig appetizers. At the center of it all, holding a crystal flute of vintage Laurent Perrier, was my daughter, Chloe. She was 32, but tonight she possessed the luminous, unshielded joy of a teenager. She was wearing a silk slip dress that caught the ambient light, and around her neck rested the delicate diamond pendant her father had given her on her 18th birthday. It had been 6 years since Richard died. 6 years of watching Chloe navigate the world with a lingering, quiet grief that made her fiercely protective of the people she loved, and terrifyingly vulnerable to anyone who knew how to mimic that love. And then there was Julian. He was standing beside her, his hand resting easily on the small of her back. Julian Hayes, 39 years old, a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley who supposedly specialized in green tech and sustainable startups. He was undeniably striking. Tall, with the kind of effortlessly tailored Navy suit that bespoke old money, even though he claimed to be self-made. I watched him from the shadows of the veranda, a polite frozen smile plastered on my face. 30 years as a forensic auditor for a top-tier corporate firm does something to your brain. It permanently rewires your perception. Where normal people see a charming smile, I see a meticulously crafted presentation. Where people hear a captivating anecdote, I listen for the inconsistencies in the timeline. Julian was currently holding court with Richard's old business partners. I watched the way he mirrored their body language. When Arthur, a notoriously difficult man, leaned forward, Julian leaned forward. When Arthur laughed, Julian offered a deep, resonant chuckle that sounded genuinely appreciative. He didn't just talk to people, he calibrated himself to them. "He's quite the catch, Eleanor," Margaret, a neighbor I'd known for 2 decades, whispered as she sidled up next to me. "Chloe looks like she's floating. And a green tech investor? He must be doing incredibly well." "He certainly seems to be," I murmured, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol all night. You don't drink when you're on watch. That was the problem. Julian was too perfect. In my line of work, a financial ledger that balances flawlessly on the first pass is the one you investigate the hardest. Real life has rounding errors. Real life has messy margins, unexpected expenses, and awkward pauses. Julian had none of those. During the 8 months they had been dating, he had never slipped up. He remembered every anniversary, brought my favorite and highly obscure brand of Earl Grey tea every time he visited, and spoke of his supposedly grueling work schedule with a practiced, weary humility. But it was his eyes that bothered me. I had noticed it a month ago over a Sunday brunch. Chloe had been telling a story about a minor disaster at her art gallery, laughing so hard she spilled her mimosa. Julian had laughed too, his mouth curving into a picture-perfect grin, but his eyes, a pale, striking blue, were completely still. They were scanning her, cataloging her reaction, assessing the environment. It was the look of a predator calculating the distance to its prey, disguised as a lover's gaze. I had tried gently to ask Chloe about his past. Where exactly in California did he grow up? Has he introduced you to any childhood friends? But Julian always had a seamless deflection. His parents had passed away when he was young. He was an only child. His boarding school friends were all scattered across the globe. He was a lone wolf who had finally found his pack in Chloe. It was a narrative designed to trigger every maternal, caregiving instinct my daughter possessed. As a cheer went up from the crowd, Julian had just kissed Chloe, raising his glass to toast his future bride. I felt a distinct physical chill settle at the base of my spine. The applause washed over the lawn. I clapped along with them, my hands moving mechanically. "Something is wrong," the auditor in my head whispered. "The numbers don't add up. I just didn't have the proof. Yet." By 11:30 p.m., the party had thinned out to the stragglers and close family friends. The catering staff was quietly clearing the tables, the clinking of silverware serving as a gentle underscore to the end of the night. I was in the kitchen, signing off on the final invoice for the event manager, when I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of heels on the hardwood floor of the hallway. Chloe burst through the swinging kitchen doors. The luminous joy from an hour ago had been completely wiped from her face. She was chalk white, her breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps, as if the oxygen in the room had suddenly been siphoned away. She looked exactly like she had the night the hospital called to tell us about her father's heart attack. "Chloe? Sweetheart, what is it?" I asked, immediately dropping the pen. I signaled the event manager to give us a moment, and the woman quickly slipped out the back door. Chloe didn't speak. She couldn't. She was visibly trembling, her manicured fingers clutching a small, dark object against her chest as if it were a bomb about to detonate. I stepped forward, gripping her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. "Look at me," I said, dropping my voice to that steady, authoritative register I used to reserve for hostile boardrooms. "Breathe in. 4 seconds. Do it." She inhaled, a shaky, tearing sound. "What happened?" I asked softly. Julian asked me to take his things up to the guest room," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "His leather briefcase. The heavy bespoke one he never lets out of his sight. I was carrying it up the stairs and my heel caught on the runner. I tripped. The briefcase dropped." She swallowed hard, tears finally pooling in her eyes, threatening to ruin her flawless makeup. "The latch must not have been locked properly. It popped open. Some folders spilled out. I knelt down to put them back, just trying to be quick so he wouldn't know I dropped it, and..." She slowly pulled the object away from her chest and held it out to me. It was a passport, not the dark blue of an American passport, which Julian supposedly possessed. It was a deep burgundy. The gold foil emblem on the front was the harp of the Republic of Ireland. My heart performed a slow, heavy thud against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain absolutely neutral. I took the document from her shaking hands. It felt heavy, lethal. I flipped it open to the photo page. Staring back at me was Julian's face. The same perfectly styled hair, the same pale blue eyes. But the details printed next to the photograph sent a shockwave of cold clarity straight through my nervous system. Name: Arthur Vance. Date of birth: 4 years older than Julian claimed to be. Place of birth: Dublin, Ireland. It wasn't a cheap forgery. It was a high-grade, meticulously crafted identity document. The kind of document you don't carry unless you need to vanish across international borders without leaving a digital footprint. "Mom!" Chloe choked out, a sob finally breaking free. "Mom, who is he? I'm marrying him in 3 months. Who is sleeping in our guest room?" In that fleeting second, I felt the overwhelming, blinding urge of a mother to march out to the terrace, grab a carving knife from the catering station, and demand answers from the man who had infiltrated our home. But the forensic auditor, the woman who had dismantled million-dollar embezzlement rings with nothing but patience and a spreadsheet, locked that motherly rage in a mental vault. Rage is sloppy. Rage tips off the suspect. I closed the passport with a soft snap. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of panic. It was a tone of absolute command. "Where is the briefcase right now?" "On the floor in the guest room. I ran straight down here. Did you move any of the other papers?" "No, I just saw the photo and grabbed it." "Okay, here is exactly what we are going to do." I wiped a stray tear from her cheek with my thumb, my eyes locking onto hers. "You are going to take this passport. You are going to walk upstairs, and you are going to slip it exactly back into the pocket where it belongs. You will close the latch. You will set the briefcase on the luggage rack, exactly the way he likes it." "I can't," she panicked, shaking her head. "I can't go near him. I can't look at him." "You can, and you will," I said, my grip on her shoulders tightening just enough to ground her. "If he realizes we know, whatever game he is playing accelerates. We lose the advantage. Right now, he thinks he is the smartest person in this house. We are going to let him keep believing that. What if he asks why I took so long? You tell him you had to touch up your lipstick, I said smoothly. You smile at him. You kiss his cheek. You tell him tonight was perfect. Can you do that for me? Can you act for just 1 more hour until he goes to sleep? Chloe looked at the passport in my hand, then up at my face. She saw something in my eyes. Perhaps the cold, calculating fury that Richard used to say made me the most dangerous woman on Wall Street. Slowly, she nodded. I handed the burgundy booklet back to her. Go. Act perfect. Tomorrow morning, I am going to find out exactly who Arthur Vance is, and then I am going to destroy him. As she slipped out of the kitchen, taking deep breaths to steady her chest, I turned toward the window facing the dark, sprawling lawn. The hunt had begun. Julian Hayes thought he had found the perfect, naive family to exploit. He didn't realize he had just invited a predator into his own trap. The next morning, Sunday, the house was devastatingly quiet. Chloe had left early for a brunch appointment, her eyes still carrying the bruised, exhausted look of a woman trying to convince herself that a nightmare was just a trick of the light. Julian had gone to the city, citing an urgent meeting with a green tech founder. It was the perfect window. I locked the door to Richard's old mahogany-paneled study. I didn't use my regular desktop. Instead, I pulled a sterile burner laptop from the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, a habit left over from my days investigating corporate espionage. I booted it up, connected through a secure, encrypted VPN routing through Switzerland, and began the hunt. In forensic auditing, you never look for the grand lie first. The grand lie is always heavily guarded. You look for the loose thread, the minor, arrogant oversight. Julian claimed his venture capital firm was called Verdant Horizon Ventures, supposedly based out of Palo Alto. I started there. A surface-level Google search yielded a sleek, minimalist website. Buzzwords like sustainable scalability and ecocentric ROI were splashed across stock photos of wind turbines and diverse boardroom meetings. It looked credible to a layman. To me, it looked like a hollow theater set. I bypassed the polished front page and dug into the state registries. California's Secretary of State database showed no corporate entity registered under that name. Interesting, but not entirely uncommon. Many startups incorporate elsewhere for tax purposes. I pivoted to Delaware, the black hole of American corporate transparency. There it was, Verdant Horizon Ventures, LLC, registered not to a Palo Alto office, but to a generic registered agent service operating out of a strip mall in Wilmington. I leaned forward, the glow of the screen illuminating the cold, half-empty cup of black coffee on my desk. I pulled the entity's employer identification number, EIN, through a proprietary database I still had legacy access to. The financial footprint was entirely wrong for a firm handling millions in green tech capital. There was no payroll, no health insurance filings for employees, no commercial lease payments. What I found instead was a labyrinth. Verdant Horizon didn't invest in startups. It funneled money into 3 other shell companies, Apex Holdings, Bluecrest Management, and Silver Oak Consulting, all registered to the same Wilmington strip mall. I tracked the routing numbers attached to their scant public filings. The money didn't flow into tech. It flowed outward, washed through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and vanished. Julian Hayes wasn't a venture capitalist. He was a ghost, operating a sophisticated network of financial dead ends. And the most chilling part? The incorporation date of Verdant Horizon, 14 months ago, exactly 2 months before he accidentally bumped into Chloe at a charity gala in Manhattan. He hadn't met her by chance. He had built an entire corporate identity specifically to become the kind of man my daughter would trust. I sat back in Richard's leather chair, the silence of the large house pressing against my ears. Julian was a predator who had built a bespoke cage just for her. By Wednesday, the wedding planning was in full swing. Chloe was trying valiantly to keep up the facade, though I caught her staring blankly at floral arrangements more than once. The anchor of her wedding preparations was Valerie, a supposedly high-end boutique wedding planner Julian had practically insisted they hire. She handled my former business partner's wedding in Napa, Julian had told us weeks ago, flashing that perfect, empty smile. She's incredibly discreet, only takes on a few clients a year. Valerie was a sharp, striking woman in her late 30s with an aggressive bob cut and a habit of speaking over people. She had just emailed over the latest invoice for the caterer's deposit, a staggering $45,000. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the PDF invoice on my iPad. Something about the routing information at the bottom of the page snagged my attention. I tapped the screen, zooming in on the banking details for Valerie's company, Vows and Vines, LLC. The bank branch was located in Wilmington, Delaware. A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my scalp. I took the iPad into the study, locked the door, and fired up the burner laptop. I ran Vows and Vines, LLC, through the Delaware registry. The registered agent was the exact same strip mall address used by Julian's fake venture capital firm. My breathing slowed. I pulled up Valerie's professional headshot from her website and ran it through a deep web facial recognition aggregator. It scraped through millions of public records, old news articles, and forgotten social media profiles. It took 12 agonizing minutes. When the results populated, my stomach plummeted. The woman in the photo wasn't Valerie the wedding planner. A decade-old police mugshot from a county jail in Nevada stared back at me, arrested for wire fraud and check kiting. The charges had been dropped on a technicality, but the name on the arrest record was clear as day. Valerie Vance, Arthur Vance, Valerie Vance. I felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just a lone con man trying to secure a payday. This was a coordinated, family-run syndicate. A pack of wolves sitting at my dining table, drinking my wine, smiling at my daughter, and methodically calculating how to strip her bare. Julian had brought his own sister into our home to orchestrate the financial bleed of the wedding itself, treating Chloe's dream day as an ATM to fund their operation while they waited for the main prize. The sheer sociopathic audacity of it left a bitter metallic taste in my mouth. I didn't just want to stop them anymore. I wanted to decimate them. Sunday afternoon. The air in Westchester was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the smoke from the backyard grill. I had insisted on hosting a casual barbecue for Julian, Chloe, and a few of our closest neighbors. Julian was outside, expertly flipping flank steaks, laughing loudly at a joke Margaret's husband had just told. He was playing the perfect, all-American son-in-law. Inside the house, I was a ghost. I slipped up the back staircase, the heavy bass of the outdoor speakers masking my footsteps. I reached the guest room Julian had converted into his makeshift office. Chloe had told me he was paranoid about his sleek silver laptop, taking it to the bathroom with him sometimes. But right now, he was trapped at the grill, surrounded by guests. I turned the brass doorknob, unlocked. He had gotten comfortable. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The laptop was on the desk, closed. I pulled a customized high-speed flash drive from the pocket of my linen trousers. It was loaded with military-grade cloning software I had acquired from an old contact at the SEC. I opened the laptop. It was password protected, of course. But people like Julian, arrogant people who think they are the smartest in the room, rarely use complex encryptions for their daily tasks. I plugged a small hardware keylogger bypass into the USB-C port, a neat trick that bypassed the lock screen by mimicking a trusted network handshake. Within 10 seconds, the desktop appeared. I inserted the cloning drive. Cloning initiated. Estimated time, 4 minutes. 4 minutes is an eternity when you are holding your breath. I kept one eye on the window overlooking the patio. Julian was still at the grill, tongs in hand, but he was looking toward the house. To pass the agonizing seconds, I quickly clicked through the visible folders on his desktop. My eyes landed on a PDF titled bridge_loan_agreement_final.pdf. I opened it. The breath caught in my throat like shattered glass. It was a contract for a short-term, high-interest bridge loan. The principal amount was $5 million. The lender was an offshore private equity group. And the collateral? the title to our Westchester estate. I scrolled frantically to the bottom page. There, sitting next to Julian's signature, was a perfect, digitally rendered forgery of Chloe's signature. He wasn't waiting for the wedding. He was going to leverage our home, take the $5 million in cash, and vanish before Chloe even put on her dress. The transfer date was set for the following Monday. Progress, 82%. A sudden burst of laughter from the patio. I looked out the window. Julian wasn't at the grill anymore. Progress, 88%. I heard the heavy, muffled thud of the front door closing downstairs. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the hardwood stairs. Fast, purposeful footsteps. "Eleanor?" Julian's voice echoed up the stairwell, smooth but with a tight edge of suspicion. "Chloe said you came inside for the salmon glaze." Progress, 94%. He was at the top of the landing. The guest room was at the end of the hall. Progress, 96%. "Eleanor, are you up here?" His footsteps were muffled by the hallway runner now. He was 10 feet away. Progress, 98%. The brass doorknob began to turn. I didn't wait for 100. I yanked the flash drive and the bypass tool out of the port simultaneously, slamming the laptop shut in one fluid, silent motion. I shoved the drives deep into the pocket of my trousers and spun around just as the door swung open. Julian stood in the doorway. The charming smile was entirely gone. His blue eyes were cold, flat, and unblinking as they locked onto me standing next to his desk. The silence in the room was heavy enough to suffocate in. "Julian," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the surface of a frozen lake. I held up a small, woven basket I'd grabbed from the bedside table. "I was just looking for the extra cedar planks. Chloe thought she left them in the closet in here, but it seems she was mistaken." Julian didn't look at the basket. He looked at the laptop. Then his eyes slowly rose to meet mine. The mask slipped back on, a slow, terrifyingly polite smile curving his lips. "The cedar planks are in the pantry downstairs, Eleanor," he said softly, stepping aside to let me pass. "Let me help you find them." As I walked past him, the sheer proximity of the man radiating a quiet, lethal threat, I felt the sharp edges of the flash drive pressing against my thigh. He suspected. He didn't know for sure, but he suspected. The cat-and-mouse game was over. We were at war. The 98% clone was enough. It was 2 a.m. on Monday. The Westchester house was encased in the heavy, breathless silence of the dead of night. 2 floors above me, Julian was asleep in the guest room, completely unaware that his digital life was currently splayed out across the screen of my burner laptop in Richard's locked study. The adrenaline from the close call at the barbecue had long since metabolized into a cold, sustained focus. I had spent the last 4 hours running a decryption script on the raw data I'd pulled from his machine. The bridge loan document was the smoking gun, but in the world of forensic auditing, you don't just find the gun. You trace the manufacturer, the buyer, and the person who left the door unlocked for the shooter. Julian's operation was too clean. He knew too much about Chloe. He knew her favorite obscure brand of tea. He knew she had a crippling fear of abandonment after Richard died. He knew the exact complex structure of the Gallagher family trust, down to the specific age milestones when the disbursements increased. That kind of granular, intimate intelligence isn't available on the dark web or public records. It requires a human source, an insider. I opened a recovered folder labeled prospect_C_archived. Inside was a dossier. It was a terrifyingly clinical breakdown of my daughter's life. It listed her daily routines, her insecurities, her banking passwords, many of which used the name of her childhood golden retriever, a detail known only to our immediate circle. But what stopped my heart was a subfolder containing exported chat logs from a secure encrypted messaging app. The sender on the other end was saved simply as M. I started reading the transcripts from 16 months ago. M. She's going to the MoMA Gala next Thursday, wearing the emerald silk dress. She's feeling incredibly lonely this week. Anniversary of her dad's passing is coming up. Be gentle. Talk about grief. She eats that up. Julian AV, acknowledged. What's the status on the trust stipulations? M. The mother still holds veto power until Chloe is 35, unless she's legally married. If she marries, the primary control transfers to a joint marital trust. You need the ring on her finger before you make a move on the principal. Julian AV. Excellent work. Wire transfer of $15,000 sent to the usual offshore account. Keep her distracted. My hands began to shake, not with fear, but with a visceral, sickening rage. I knew who M was. I just didn't want to believe it. I pulled up the routing number for the $15,000 offshore account, referenced in the chat. Using my legacy access to international wire databases, I traced the destination of the funds. It didn't go to a tropical island. It went to a shell company in Macau, heavily associated with high-stakes online gambling debt collection. I cross-referenced the debt account holder, Mia Sterling, Chloe's maid of honor, her college roommate, the girl who had sat at my kitchen island crying over her breakups, eating my pancakes and calling me Mama L. Mia, who had been secretly drowning in sports betting and poker debts for 3 years. Mia, who had sold her best friend to a professional con artist piece by piece to keep the loan sharks from breaking her legs. I leaned back in Richard's leather chair, the glow of the screen casting long, harsh shadows across my face. The sheer scale of the betrayal was suffocating. Chloe wasn't just the victim of a sophisticated financial predator. She was entirely surrounded by traitors. The woman fixing her veil and the man waiting at the altar were both looking at her as nothing more than a payout. For a brief, agonizing moment, the weight of the isolation crushed me. Richard was gone. Chloe was blindly, blissfully walking into a slaughterhouse. I was the only one standing between my daughter and total ruin. I closed my eyes, took a long, deep breath of the stale air in the study, and locked the motherly sorrow away in a dark box. There was no time for tears. Sorrow wouldn't save her. Only a monster could fight a monster, and I was about to become the worst thing Julian Hayes had ever met. Tuesday morning, I called Harrison Thorne. Harrison had been our family's estate lawyer for 25 years. He was a man of impeccable tailored suits, a ruthless understanding of tax law, and absolute loyalty to Richard's memory. When he arrived at the house at 10 a.m., I bypassed the pleasantries, locked the study door, and handed him the printed dossier. I watched his patrician face drain of color as he read through the passport scans, the bridge loan forgery, and the chat logs with Mia. "My God, Eleanor," Harrison breathed, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing his temples. "We need to call the FBI immediately. We need the local police. We can have him arrested for the forgery today." "No," I said, my voice sharp and flat. I was standing by the window looking out at the gardeners manicuring the front lawn for a wedding that would never happen. "If we call the police now, he claims the bridge loan was a misunderstanding. He claims Chloe gave him verbal permission to sign. He hires a slick defense attorney, ties us up in court for years, and quietly disappears while out on bail. Furthermore, it doesn't solve the Mia problem. Chloe's heart would be broken, but she'd never fully understand the depth of the manipulation. She might even forgive Mia." I turned to face him, leaning my hands flat on the mahogany desk. "I don't just want him arrested, Harrison. I want him legally decimated. I want him to lock the handcuffs on his own wrists, and I need a weapon to do it." Harrison looked at me, recognizing the old, predatory gleam in my eye from my auditing days. "What kind of weapon?" "A financial Trojan horse," I said, pulling a blank legal pad toward me. "I want to offer Julian an early wedding gift, a gesture of my absolute trust. We are going to draft an amendment to the Gallagher Family Trust." Harrison frowned, picking up a pen. "You want to give him access?" "I want to give him the illusion of access," I corrected. "We are going to create a sub-trust, $5 million liquid cash. We will name Julian and Chloe as co-trustees, effective immediately upon signing, no marriage required." "Eleanor, that's suicide. He'll wire the money to his Cayman accounts the second the ink is dry." "Let him try," I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. Because buried in the boilerplate legalese of that amendment, you are going to weave in the most draconian aggressive IRS compliance clauses ever written. You will state that by signing as a fiduciary, Julian consents to immediate, unannounced federal audits. You will embed a FinCEN network trigger. The moment a wire transfer exceeding $10,000 is initiated to an offshore entity without 30 days prior written notice, it constitutes a definitive admission of wire fraud under 18 U.S. Code Section 1343. Harrison's eyes widened as the architecture of the trap became clear. You're making the trust a federal honeypot. If he signs it, he legally waives his right to a defense. If he tries to move a single dime, the bank's automated systems will instantly freeze the asset and flag the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He won't just be committing a crime, he'll be providing the signed confession. Exactly, I whispered. I want the contract drafted by tomorrow. Thick, boring, standard-looking font. Hide the poison pills on page 47. And the girl? Mia? Harrison asked softly. Leave Mia to me, I replied. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I went to the final dress fitting with Chloe and Mia. I stood in the boutique, sipping champagne, watching Mia adjust the train of my daughter's gown. Mia smiled at me, her eyes bright and deceptive. "Mama Elle, she looks so beautiful," Mia had said. I smiled back, holding my champagne flute. "She really does, Mia. You've been such a good friend to her." I watched a flicker of guilt, quickly buried, cross Mia's face. Thursday evening arrived. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the following night. The trap was set. The legal documents, beautifully bound in dark leather folders, sat on the entryway console table. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, clasping Richard's pearl necklace around my throat. I smoothed the lines of my charcoal blazer. I looked like a wealthy, supportive mother of the bride. But underneath the veneer, I felt the icy, calm precision of an executioner. I walked downstairs to the dining room. It was time for the final supper. The heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open, and the storm outside seemed to rush in all at once, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and wet asphalt. 4 federal agents stepped into the room, their wet shoes squeaking slightly against the polished hardwood. Arthur Vance, the man who had spent 14 months meticulously curating the identity of Julian Hayes, did not fight. He didn't scream, and he didn't beg. When the lead agent read him his rights and pulled his hands behind his back, the metallic clack of the handcuffs echoed with terrifying finality in the cavernous room. Arthur just stared at the Persian rug, his bespoke suit suddenly looking like a costume that was 2 sizes too big. He was a ghost who had finally been dragged into the light. As they marched him out into the driving rain, Chloe stood frozen by the table, the canvas weekender bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. She didn't cry. The shock was too absolute, too profound for tears. She looked at the empty space where her fiancé had just been kneeling, and then she looked at me. I didn't rush to coddle her. I didn't wrap her in a suffocating embrace. I walked over, picked up the bag, and set it on the chair. Then I poured her a glass of the 1998 Bordeaux. "Drink this," I said quietly, handing her the crystal glass. "It's going to be a very long night, and tomorrow will be worse. But you are safe. The ledger is closed." The next morning, the cleanup began. It was swift and surgical. I dealt with Mia first. She arrived at the house at 9 a.m., holding a box of pastries, fully expecting to help Chloe pack for the rehearsal dinner. I met her on the front porch. I didn't let her inside. I simply handed her a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of the FBI indictment against Arthur Vance, along with a printed screenshot of her offshore gambling debt and the $15,000 wire transfer. "The wedding is off, Mia," I said, my voice as cold as the morning air. "And the bank is officially closed. Harrison Thorne has already forwarded this file to the federal prosecutor. Whether they decide to indict you as a co-conspirator is out of my hands. But if you ever contact my daughter again, I will personally ensure the loan sharks in Macau receive your current home address." Mia's face crumpled into a mask of pure terror. She dropped the pastry box and ran to her car. Chloe never had to see her face again. 2 weeks later, the storm had truly passed, leaving behind a quiet, bruised stillness. I asked Chloe to join me and Harrison Thorne in Richard's study. The autumn sun was streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Chloe sat in the leather armchair, looking thinner, but the hollow devastation in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a hard, resilient clarity. "There is one last thing we need to discuss," Harrison said gently, opening a heavy, brass-bound ledger on the desk. "It's about your father's will." Chloe looked up, confused. "Dad's will? But the trust was settled years ago." "The financial structure was settled, yes," I said, leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk. "But there was a mechanism Richard built into the core framework of the Gallagher Family Trust. Something neither Julian nor Mia could have ever found, because it wasn't kept on any digital server. It existed only as a hard copy in a bank vault." Harrison turned the heavy parchment page. "In corporate finance, we call it a poison pill. It's a defense strategy used to prevent a hostile takeover. Your father, Chloe, applied it to his own family." He slid the document toward her. "Your father stipulated that before any spouse could be legally added as a co-trustee, or before any marital disbursement could be made, the candidate had to submit to a Level 4 federal background check, authorized by a private security firm of my choosing. Furthermore, the disbursement required biometric verification, fingerprints, to clear the escrow account." Chloe stared at the dense legal text, her lips parting in shock. "If the background check flagged a false identity, or if the fingerprints matched an individual with a felony record for financial fraud," Harrison continued, his voice thick with reverence for his old friend, "the entire $5 million marital fund would instantly and irrevocably bypass you, Eleanor, and the spouse. It would be automatically wired to a registered 501c3 wildlife conservation charity in Kenya." The room fell silent. Chloe looked at me, a single tear slipping down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of grief. It was awe. "Even if I had failed?" I whispered, looking at the framed photo of Richard on the bookshelf. "Even if Julian had managed to isolate you, marry you in Paris, and bypass me completely, he would have walked away with nothing. The moment he tried to claim the money, he would have triggered the poison pill. Your father protected you from the grave, Chloe. He built a fortress around you." Chloe touched her diamond pendant, her fingers trembling slightly. She finally understood. She wasn't just the target of a scam. She was the fiercely protected daughter of two people who had anticipated the cruelty of the world and armed her against it. 1 year later. The air in Westchester is crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Chloe didn't break. She bent, she shattered for a moment, and then she rebuilt herself with the sharp, jagged edges facing outward. She is thriving. Her art gallery in Manhattan has doubled its revenue. Just yesterday, I watched her reject a questionable vendor contract, her eyes scanning the fine print with a cold, calculating precision that made my heart swell with an unfamiliar, fierce pride. She no longer trusts blindly. She audits. I sit on the terrace, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, a cup of Earl Grey tea warming my hands. The infinity pool reflects the fiery orange of the autumn trees. Voiceover begins. Eleanor's tone is steady, reflective, yet unapologetically sharp. People love to romanticize motherhood. They paint it in soft pastels, endless patience, warm cookies, and unconditional forgiveness. But they forget the biology of it. They forget that in the wild, the mother is the most dangerous creature in the forest. Real protection isn't about wrapping your child in bubble wrap and hoping the world treats them kindly. The world is full of predators wearing bespoke suits, speaking in gentle tones, offering exactly what you want to hear. Real protection is teaching your child how to spot the wolf, and until they learn, you stand in the doorway, you watch the shadows. If you are a parent watching this, and you feel that quiet, persistent chill at the base of your spine when you look at the person holding your child's hand, do not ignore it. Do not apologize for your suspicion. The fear of being called paranoid or overbearing is the exact weapon they use to keep you quiet. Break their locks. Follow the money. Read the fine print. You do not need to be fair to a parasite. Arthur Vance thought he was a master manipulator. He thought he could leverage a widow's grief and a daughter's love to balance his own corrupted ledger. But he made a catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot that before I was a grieving widow, and before I was a loving mother, I was an auditor. And I always balanced the books.